January 22nd, 1944. The campaign in Italy had devolved into a brutal, grinding deadlock against the formidable German Gustav Line, a layered defensive network masterfully constructed across the narrowest point of the peninsula. The relentless fighting, particularly the agonizing stalemate at Monte Cassino, had convinced Allied strategists that a direct, frontal assault was unsustainable, consuming irreplaceable manpower and time. The solution, conceived as a dramatic strategic bypass to break the deadlock and secure the ultimate prize of Rome, was Operation Shingle, an audacious, high-risk amphibious landing on the beaches near the small coastal town of Anzio, just 30 miles south of the Italian capital. The strategic objective of the Anzio landing was not merely to seize a beachhead. It was to create a cat's claw deep in the German rear, forcing Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the brilliant commander of German forces in Italy, to divert crucial reserves away from the Gustav Line. This diversion, the planners hoped, would allow the main Allied forces to break through the line, link up with the newly established beachhead, and secure a swift, triumphant advance to Rome. The plan was a massive gamble. It relied on the element of surprise, the swift exploitation of the initial landing, and the immediate strong reaction of the German command. The ultimate success of the mission hinged entirely on the speed and audacity of the initial push inland. The invasion force, composed of the U.S. Set Corps and the British 1st Infantry Division, landed at dawn under a cloak of surprise and heavy naval support. The initial hours of the landing were characterized by a profound, eerie silence. The beaches were virtually undefended, a scenario that initially fueled optimism and suggested a rapid, unhindered breakthrough. The logistical process of rapidly moving men, supplies, and armor ashore proceeded with characteristic American and British efficiency, transforming the quiet beaches into a bustling, massive operational hub within hours. The initial success was total, exceeding all expectations for a hostile amphibious landing. However, this lack of immediate German resistance proved to be a fatal strategic trap. The Allied commander, Major General John P. Lucas, facing the immense pressure of securing the perimeter and the logistical base, chose caution over audacity. Instead of exploiting the initial surprise with a swift, deep thrust inland toward the Alban Hills, the crucial high ground that overlooked the plain, Lucas prioritized the consolidation of the beachhead. This decision, driven by a fear of being cut off and annihilated, a recent memory from the Salerno landings, consumed the precious hours of surprise and allowed Kesselring the necessary time to recover, assess the threat, and initiate a massive, decisive counter-reaction. The calculated risk of Operation Shingle was about to transform into the agonizing reality of the Anzio death trap. The German commanders, initially caught off guard, were now organizing a relentless, suffocating response that would turn the beachhead into the most fiercely contested piece of ground on the entire Western Front. The initial agonizing pause by the Allied command was immediately exploited by the strategic genius of Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. Recognizing the dire existential threat posed by the Anzio landing, a knife pointed directly at the heart of the German occupation in Italy and his main defensive line, Kesselring initiated a calculated massive strategic counter that rapidly transformed the seemingly secure Allied beachhead into a desperate, high-stakes siege. Kesselring's decisive, swift reaction was the ultimate strategic maneuver that defined the subsequent 4 months of the battle. Kesselring did not panic. He immediately understood the tactical opportunity presented by Lucas's caution. The Allied forces, having failed to seize the Alban Hills, the crucial commanding high ground, were now trapped on the low-lying, often swampy coastal plain, a landscape perfectly suited for German artillery and defense. Kesselring issued immediate, urgent orders for the massive, rapid concentration of forces from across Italy and Europe, prioritizing the annihilation of the Anzio landing above all else. This counter-move, codenamed Operation Fish Fang, Fish Trap, demonstrated the immense strategic value placed on the defense of Rome and the Gustav Line. The German response was a logistical masterpiece executed with brutal efficiency. German divisions, including veteran armored units and newly committed reserves, were rushed to the perimeter of the beachhead, systematically sealing off the low-lying plain. The German forces quickly established a commanding defensive ring, concentrating massive amounts of heavy artillery on the surrounding high ground. The Allied beachhead, originally envisioned as a cat's claw, was now encircled and transformed into a tight, vulnerable cauldron under continuous, accurate German fire. The entire front line of the beachhead was barely 7 miles deep and 16 miles wide, placing the entire Allied force and their massive supply dumps within effective range of the German guns. The relentless German artillery fire, earning the beachhead the grim nickname Hell's Half-Acre, became the defining, terrifying reality of the siege. German observers, safely positioned on the Alban Hills, could direct pre-registered fire with chilling precision onto the static Allied positions, making every movement, every supply dump, and every command post a target. The Allied troops, digging frantically into the shallow, muddy ground, were now fighting two enemies: the entrenched German infantry and the unyielding, accurate barrage from the high ground. Kesselring's calculated counter-move had succeeded. The Allied forces were pinned down, and the hope of a swift breakout was decisively crushed, ushering in the long, brutal siege of Anzio. Attention, forward observers! You've witnessed the brutal consequences of strategic hesitation, the rapid sealing of the Anzio beachhead by Kesselring's genius. If the power of rapid counter-reaction and the terror of sustained artillery fire resonate with your understanding of the war's pivot points, then do not let the history be silenced by the barrage. Subscribe now and commit to analyzing the battles where strategic timing was everything. And here is your tactical query. Was the subsequent Anzio stalemate primarily caused by General Lucas's initial delay, or the sheer logistical speed of Kesselring's counteroffensive? Drop your strategic assessment in the comments below. Let the historical debate define the cost of caution. Once encircled, the Anzio beachhead transformed immediately into a literal cauldron, a tight, vulnerable pocket where every soldier, from the frontline infantry to the rear echelon support staff, was constantly within range of the German heavy artillery. The entire battle became a siege of endurance, a continuous, unrelenting test of the Allied capacity for survival under systematic, coordinated bombardment. The fight for Anzio was reduced to the most basic human endeavor: digging and enduring. The German artillery fire was relentless and highly effective, utilizing sophisticated observers and pre-registered coordinates that made targeting the static Allied positions almost effortless. The accuracy of the shelling made the beachhead an operational nightmare, constantly disrupting the logistical flow and inflicting a slow, agonizing attrition on the Allied forces. Supply dumps were hit, command posts were targeted, and the constant threat of incoming fire forced the troops into a state of perpetual, high-stress vigilance. The German guns, strategically positioned on the Alban Hills, were the true commanders of the Anzio battlefield. The Allied response to this relentless bombardment was simple: digging and dispersal. Every piece of equipment, every vehicle, and every man had to be placed in deep, protected shelters. The shallow, muddy ground of the coastal plain was ill-suited for deep entrenchment, requiring immense, continuous labor to construct protected bunkers and communication trenches. The entire operation became a contest of engineering resilience against high-explosive ordnance, a grim, continuous process of repair, replacement, and survival. The Allied soldiers were not just fighting the German infantry, they were fighting the terrain and the constant existential threat of a shell bearing their name. The psychological toll of the continuous bombardment was immense. The sheer noise, the lack of sanctuary, and the constant uncertainty of the next shell strike wore down the morale of even the most hardened veterans. Yet, the Allied forces demonstrated extraordinary resilience. The constant, immediate need for survival and the immense scale of the logistical effort provided a unique sense of purpose. The fighting became a profound demonstration that courage could indeed outlast chaos. Sustained by the unwavering belief in the supply line and the ultimate strategic goal of holding the beachhead. The Anzio beachhead, this tight, perilous cauldron, was the ultimate strategic gamble that spiraled into a siege. The failure to break out was a tactical blunder, but the successful defense of the beachhead, sustained under the relentless fire, became a testament to the immense material and human endurance of the Allied system. The survival of the beachhead was secured by the sheer will of the soldiers to remain rooted in the mud, waiting for the logistical advantage to finally swing the balance back in their favor. The subsequent lengthy stalemate at Anzio transformed the operation from a strategic bypass into a strategic nightmare for the Allied command. The entire premise of Operation Shingle, to force a German diversion and enable the main breakthrough, failed to materialize into a swift victory, instead resulting in the immobilization and near encirclement of the Zizek Corps. The strategic situation was pinched, paralyzed, and dangerously close to catastrophic failure. The strategic nightmare was rooted in the reversal of the attrition logic. Instead of the Allies inflicting heavy losses on the Germans by drawing their forces into a costly counterattack, Kesselring had successfully reversed the dynamic. The static, tightly packed Allied forces were now the victims of systematic attrition from the concentrated German artillery, consuming Allied manpower and equipment at an unsustainable rate. The tight perimeter prevented the effective dispersal of troops and supplies, maximizing the damage inflicted by the continuous barrage. The strategic paralysis was compounded by the failure of the main Gustav Line offensive. The breakthrough that the Anzio landing was supposed to facilitate did not occur. The German reserves diverted to Anzio were successfully replaced, allowing the main Allied forces to remain bogged down in the mountains. This meant the Anzio beachhead remained isolated, unable to link up with the main army, and dangerously reliant on the tenuous, vulnerable sea supply route. The strategic nightmare was the realization that the beachhead was not a dagger in the enemy's side, but a heavily defended logistical base fighting for its own immediate survival. The desperate gravity of the situation was articulated by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who famously remarked that the Allied forces had landed a whale on the beaches and were now forced to commit immense resources to keep the whale alive. The logistical demands of sustaining the isolated beachhead were enormous, diverting massive amounts of transport, supplies, and naval protection away from other crucial theaters of war. The entire operation, intended as a shortcut, became a strategic drain on Allied resources. The ultimate strategic nightmare was the near-catastrophic German counteroffensive launched in February 1944. Kesselring, having successfully contained the beachhead, committed massive forces to a final coordinated push to annihilate the Allied position and drive the forces back into the sea. This brutal assault breached the outer perimeter, pushing the Allied forces back to the final line of defense near the coast, and placing the entire landing in imminent danger of destruction. The survival of the beachhead was secured only by the immense commitment of Allied air support and naval gunfire, confirming just how close the strategic gamble came to utter ruin. The battle for Anzio was not a victory of maneuver. It was a brutal, sustained struggle against strategic failure. Attention, command post! You've seen the sheer terror of the Anzio death trap, a strategic nightmare of artillery and isolation. The survival of the beachhead was secured by inches. If the high-stakes gamble and the resilience under fire resonate with your understanding of the costs of command, then do not let this critical lesson be lost. Subscribe now and commit to analyzing the campaigns where chaos was the rule. And here is your tactical query. What was the greatest strategic error of Anzio? The failure to seize the Alban Hills quickly, or the excessive caution in committing reserves? Drop your strategic assessment in the comments below. Let the historical debate define the meaning of audacity. The survival of the isolated Anzio beachhead, pinned down and paralyzed by the German siege, was an unassailable logistical triumph, a profound demonstration of the immense, coordinated capacity of the Allied supply system to sustain a massive fighting force under continuous, concentrated enemy fire. The Battle of Anzio was ultimately won not by the infantry charges, but by the relentless, unyielding efficiency of the ships and supply crews. The core logistical challenge was the vulnerability of the port and supply dumps. The tight perimeter and the commanding German artillery positions meant that the entire logistical infrastructure was constantly within range of enemy fire. Ships unloading on the beach and supplies stacked on the narrow plain were prime targets for the German guns. The Allied Logistical Corps responded with ingenuity and immense bravery, utilizing round-the-clock, rapid unloading techniques under camouflage, moving supplies immediately to dispersed, protected depots, and utilizing every piece of specialized equipment to minimize the exposure of the supply line. The logistical lifeline was sustained by the continuous, immense flow of shipping. Hundreds of supply vessels protected by the massive Allied naval shield continually ferried ammunition, food, fuel, and replacement troops from Naples and other secure ports. The constant pressure of the German siege demanded a prodigious, unceasing logistical commitment, ensuring that the Allied troops never lacked the necessary materiel to sustain the high-intensity defensive war. The sheer volume of supplies poured onto Hell's Half-Acre was a final, unassailable statement of Allied industrial and organizational supremacy. The psychological impact of this logistical resilience was immense. The Allied soldier, enduring the relentless shelling, was sustained by the visual and physical reality that the supply ships always arrived. The continuous flow of food and ammunition provided the essential morale anchor, guaranteeing the troops that their immense sacrifice was supported by an industrial system that could not be broken. The logistical lifeline was the ultimate weapon of endurance, ensuring that the immense strategic gamble of Anzio was not lost to starvation or lack of materiel. The defense of Anzio, therefore, was a profound demonstration that courage could outlast chaos only when supported by an unyielding logistical machine. The survival of the isolated beachhead was secured by the immense commitment of the Allied supply system, a final, total victory for organization, industry, and the enduring power of the continuous, unceasing flow of materiel. The logistical triumph of Anzio provided the essential, costly anchor for the final, slow advance to Rome. Adria, final command assessment. You've tracked the immense logistical struggle that kept Anzio alive, a battle won by supply ships and engineers. If the strategic role of endurance and the logistical lifeline resonates with your mind, do not let this lesson be lost. Subscribe now and commit to preserving the analysis of these vital strategic struggles. And here is your final intelligence task. Suggest the next great siege of Outlast, a battle where logistical and human endurance were the deciding factors. For our deep dive analysis, your suggestions guide our strategic mission. The survival of the isolated Anzio beachhead was guaranteed not only by the naval supply route, but also by the absolute strategic shield provided by the air umbrella, the total unwavering dominance of the skies by the Allied air forces. This air superiority was the final non-negotiable factor that suppressed the German counterattack and ensured the continuous logistical flow to the beleaguered forces on the coastal plain. The primary role of the Allied air forces was suppression of the German artillery. The German guns on the Alban Hills were the ultimate threat to the beachhead, and Allied fighter bombers were continuously tasked with counter-battery fire, aiming to locate and destroy the concealed German positions. The immense, sustained aerial reconnaissance and attack runs, often flown through intense German anti-aircraft fire, systematically neutralized the most effective German weapon, forcing the German artillery into a defensive, less accurate fire pattern. The air umbrella directly reduced the intensity and effectiveness of the Hell's Half-Acre barrage. The air umbrella also provided the crucial protection of the sea lanes and the beachhead. Any German attempt to launch a counterattack by air or to interdict the vital Allied supply shipping was immediately and overwhelmingly neutralized by the massive formations of Allied fighters and bombers. The continuous presence of Allied air power ensured that the German forces could not sustain a coordinated, large-scale counterattack, which would have been impossible without the protection of air cover. The skies above Anzio were effectively sealed, guaranteeing the continuous safe operation of the logistical supply ships. The psychological impact of the air umbrella was immense. The Allied soldier, pinned down by the German shelling, drew immense comfort and morale from the visible presence of the Allied fighter bombers patrolling overhead. Conversely, the German soldier, operating under the constant threat of aerial attack, was hampered by the fear of exposure, limiting their mobility and their capacity for effective counterattack. The Allied air dominance was a continuous, devastating form of psychological warfare. The survival of Anzio, therefore, was a profound testament to the power of integrated air and ground defense. The air umbrella transformed the German siege from a decisive, rapid annihilation into a prolonged, costly struggle of attrition that the German forces could not sustain. The absolute control of the skies was the final, non-negotiable, strategic factor that secured the entire operation, guaranteeing the continuous logistical flow and the ultimate necessary endurance of the beachhead. The lengthy, grinding siege of Anzio was finally broken not by an internal offensive from the beachhead, but by the massive, coordinated Allied offensive known as Operation Diadem, launched from the main front in May 1944. The link-up between the main Allied forces and the isolated beachhead was the ultimate strategic payoff of the immense endurance demonstrated by the troops on the coastal plain. Operation Diadem was the most massive, coordinated offensive of the entire Italian campaign, designed to smash the German Gustav Line definitively and accelerate the final advance to Rome. The offensive, which included the immense commitment of American, British, French, Indian, and Polish forces, finally succeeded in breaching the fortified German line, forcing Kesselring into a difficult, prolonged retreat. The strategic pressure applied by Operation Diadem immediately alleviated the siege conditions at Anzio, forcing the German divisions encircling the beachhead to divert their attention to the advancing main Allied armies. The troops in the Anzio beachhead, realizing the strategic opportunity, launched a final coordinated breakout offensive designed to meet the advancing main armies. This offensive, though costly, succeeded in pushing the German defensive ring outward, turning the prolonged siege into a rapid, decisive pursuit. The final link-up between the isolated Sixth Corps and the advancing main Allied forces was a powerful emotional moment, confirming the total success of the strategic plan and the immense payoff of the sustained endurance. The strategic consequence of the link-up was the guarantee of the final advance to Rome. The combined Allied forces, now operating as a unified, massive offensive force, pushed relentlessly toward the Italian capital, exploiting the disintegration of the German defensive line. The siege of Anzio, which had lasted for 4 agonizing months, was concluded by the rapid, overwhelming power of the combined Allied armies, accelerating the final strategic goal. The final breakout and the link-up confirmed the strategic necessity of the Anzio operation. Despite the high cost, the strategic pressure applied by the beachhead, the commitment of German reserves, and the relentless attrition had significantly contributed to the final collapse of the Gustav Line and the success of Operation Diadem. The ultimate strategic payoff justified the immense endurance and logistical commitment required to keep the beachhead alive. The survival of the Anzio beachhead, while a strategic victory, came at an immense cost of courage, a devastating drain on Allied manpower and strategic resources that ultimately prolonged the entire Italian campaign. The strategic necessity of holding the beachhead consumed immense human and material capital, highlighting the immense complexity and high cost of the gamble. The human cost was immense. The Allied forces suffered over 25,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing, during the 4 months of the siege. This sustained, high-cost attrition, driven by the relentless German artillery fire and the subsequent near-annihilation counteroffensive, consumed massive numbers of American and British troops. The manpower drain was compounded by the high rate of non-combat casualties from disease, exhaustion, and trench-related illnesses, placing immense strain on the medical and logistical support systems. The strategic drain was equally significant. The necessity of maintaining the isolated beachhead diverted massive amounts of shipping, air support, and logistical supplies away from other crucial theaters of war. The entire operation became a strategic commitment that consumed massive resources, prolonging the final advance to Rome and delaying the deployment of Allied forces to other fronts. The ultimate strategic payoff, though achieved, was purchased at an immense cost in strategic time and material commitment. The sacrifice of the Anzio forces was necessary, but the strategic analysis confirms that the immense cost was a direct consequence of the failure to achieve the initial breakout. The immense strategic risk, taken with the initial landing, spiraled into a costly siege that consumed far more resources than originally planned. The survival of the beachhead, therefore, was a demonstration of immense endurance, but also a sober testament to the high price of strategic hesitation. The legacy of Anzio remains a profound reminder that courage must be supported by strategic rationality. The immense sacrifice of the forces on the beachhead was justified by the final capture of Rome, but the immense cost highlights the high strategic price of the gamble. The cost of courage was immense, cementing the total human cost of the protracted struggle. The final advance to Rome following the link-up at Anzio was dictated by the masterful Italian rearguard action executed by Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. Recognizing the total collapse of the Gustav Line, Kesselring initiated a disciplined, highly professional strategic retreat, avoiding the total annihilation of his forces and inflicting maximum attrition on the advancing Allied armies. Kesselring's retreat was a final, brilliant strategic maneuver in a losing campaign. Kesselring's primary objective was simple: trade space for time. By executing a systematic, organized withdrawal, he avoided the large-scale encirclement and annihilation of his forces, preserving the fighting capacity of his armies for the defense of the subsequent lines of defense in northern Italy. The German forces systematically utilized the rugged Italian geography, destroying bridges, sowing minefields, and launching highly effective rearguard actions from fortified positions, ensuring that the Allied advance was agonizingly slow and costly. The strategic success of the German rearguard was rooted in their professional discipline and tactical skill. The German forces, though outnumbered and fighting a losing war, maintained cohesion, forcing the Allied armies to engage in a continuous series of costly frontal assaults and clearance operations. The destruction of the Italian infrastructure, the bridges, the roads, and the rail lines, was systematic and effective, consuming the logistical resources of the advancing Allies and slowing the relentless pursuit. The final advance to Rome, though inevitable, was prolonged and high cost, a direct consequence of the brilliant, disciplined German rearguard action. Kesselring successfully managed to preserve the core of his fighting force, ensuring that the war in Italy would continue for another agonizing year, delaying the total strategic conclusion. The Italian rearguard was the ultimate testament to Kesselring's strategic genius and the professional discipline of the German soldier in a terminal campaign. The strategic legacy of the German retreat remains a sobering reminder that a professional, disciplined defense can significantly prolong a war even in the face of overwhelming material superiority. The immense cost of the Allied advance to Rome was a direct consequence of the German commitment to the masterful, agonizing strategic withdrawal. The culmination of the grinding, protracted Italian campaign was the capture of Rome, the ultimate prize and a profound symbolic victory for the Allied forces. The seizure of the First Axis capital was not merely a military objective. It was a powerful, unassailable statement of the ultimate strategic outcome of the war, achieved through immense human and logistical sacrifice. The strategic importance of Rome was primarily symbolic and political. The capture of the Eternal City provided the Allied forces with a massive morale boost, a public declaration of the impending defeat of the Axis powers. The event, achieved through the sustained endurance of the Anzio forces and the massive commitment of Operation Diadem, served as a powerful propaganda tool, signaling to the world that the final victory was inevitable. The fall of Rome was the final strategic punctuation mark on the protracted struggle in Italy. The German command, recognizing the immense political value of the city, declared Rome an open city, avoiding the immense destruction of house-to-house fighting and preserving the historic city's cultural heritage. This pragmatic decision, made under the immense pressure of the collapsing defensive line, ensured that the Allied advance was not bogged down in a costly, prolonged urban siege, allowing the pursuit of the main German forces to continue immediately. The final advance into Rome was a rapid, decisive political maneuver. The final victory was achieved through the immense, sustained logistical effort that defined the entire Italian campaign. The capture of Rome was the ultimate payoff for the sustained endurance of the Anzio forces, the immense commitment of Operation Diadem, and the continuous flow of supplies that sustained the massive Allied armies. The logistical triumph guaranteed that the immense strategic objective was secured, confirming the total strategic superiority of the Allied system. The legacy of the capture of Rome remains a powerful testament to the symbolic importance of political objectives in total war. The ultimate prize, secured through immense sacrifice and logistical commitment, served as a powerful declaration of the Allied commitment to the final strategic victory. The fall of Rome was the necessary final act that guaranteed the focus of the war would shift decisively to the final campaigns in the West and the total defeat of the German military machine. The prolonged siege and ultimate success of the Anzio beachhead were profoundly influenced by the technological edge possessed by the Allied forces, particularly in radar, communications, and the systematic application of artillery support. This technological superiority was the crucial force multiplier that compensated for the German advantage in defensive positioning and ensured the necessary endurance of the isolated forces. The primary technological advantage was the superiority of Allied radar and fire control systems, naval vessels offshore, and the subsequent commitment of specialized ground-based radar units provided critical early warning of incoming German counterattacks and allowed for the rapid, accurate location of concealed German artillery positions on the Alban Hills. This technological foresight neutralized the element of surprise in the German counteroffensives and allowed the Allied command to direct massive, coordinated counter-battery fire against the most effective German weapon. The German inability to effectively counter the Allied radar was a terminal technological failure. The second crucial element was the systematic application of artillery and naval fire support. The Allied forces, utilizing their immense ammunition reserves, maintained a continuous massive fire umbrella over the beachhead. Naval guns provided the essential long-range support, while ground artillery maintained the continuous suppression of the German defensive line. This technological capacity to deliver overwhelming coordinated fire support was the final, non-negotiable factor that broke the German counteroffensive and guaranteed the survival of the beachhead. The German forces, conversely, were fighting with diminishing reserves and inferior fire control systems. The resilience of the Allied communication network was equally vital, maintaining continuous, secure communication between the frontline forces, the command posts, the artillery batteries, and the naval vessels offshore, was the essential logistical precondition for the sustained defense. The Allied communication system, utilizing advanced radio technology and disciplined protocols, ensured that the command structure maintained cohesion and rapidly coordinated the massive defensive response. The German forces, conversely, struggled with fragmented communication and centralized command. The technological edge at Anzio transformed the strategic balance. The Allied ability to effectively counter the German artillery, locate and neutralize concentrated attacks, and maintain cohesive communication guaranteed that the siege, though costly, was strategically winnable. The technological superiority was the decisive factor that allowed the immense human and logistical sacrifice to ultimately achieve the final strategic payoff. The immense strategic cost of the Anzio beachhead was profoundly compounded by an unseen enemy: the relentless attrition inflicted by disease, chronic fatigue, and the hostile environment of the coastal swamp. The strategic battle was fought not only against the German Wehrmacht, but against the debilitating effects of trench warfare in the low-lying, marshy coastal plain, placing an immense, continuous strain on the logistical and medical support systems. The core of the medical crisis was the inhospitable terrain. The shallow, muddy ground of the coastal plain provided poor drainage, creating widespread marshy conditions that amplified the prevalence of disease. Trench foot, pneumonia, and dysentery ravaged the Allied ranks, inflicting massive, continuous non-combat casualties. The tight perimeter of the beachhead prevented the effective dispersal of troops and sanitation facilities, further accelerating the spread of illness. The medical support system was continuously overwhelmed by the sheer volume of casualties, requiring evacuation and specialized treatment. The strategic effect of the disease and fatigue was the systematic erosion of fighting capacity. The continuous exposure to the cold, wet conditions, coupled with the immense psychological stress of perpetual bombardment, reduced the operational effectiveness of the frontline units. The American and British forces were constantly rotating troops, struggling to maintain the necessary manpower and cohesion to sustain the high-intensity defensive war. The manpower drain was a final, unassailable strategic cost of the gamble. The Allied response to the unseen enemy was a combination of medical ingenuity and logistical commitment. The massive deployment of specialized medical personnel, the rapid establishment of field hospitals, and the systematic use of preventive measures were essential for managing the crisis. The continuous evacuation of the sick and wounded, utilizing specialized transport, and the vast logistical network guaranteed that the immense manpower drain was partially mitigated. The medical logistics of Anzio were a final immense challenge that the American system was uniquely equipped to bear. The legacy of the unseen enemy remains a sobering reminder that total war is fought not only against the military adversary, but against the environment itself. The immense strategic cost of the disease and fatigue at Anzio confirmed the profound human consequence of a prolonged siege fought in an inhospitable terrain. The battle was won by the immense endurance of the troops, sustained by the superior medical and logistical support that managed the ravages of the swamp. Attention, Medical Corps. You've seen the toll taken by the unseen enemy. Disease and fatigue almost broke the beachhead. If the strategic burden of medical logistics resonates with your mind, do not let this vital lesson be lost. Subscribe now and commit to preserving the analysis of these critical struggles. And here is your tactical query. What was the single greatest contributor to non-combat casualties at Anzio? Trench foot, immersion foot, or combat fatigue induced by relentless shelling? Drop your strategic assessment in the comments below. Let the historical debate define the ultimate cost of the siege. The survival and subsequent success of the Anzio beachhead were secured by the absolute firepower superiority of the Allied forces, primarily delivered by the immense, systematic application of naval guns. The presence of the massive Allied naval shield offshore provided the isolated beachhead with a final, non-negotiable strategic asset that the German forces could neither match nor overcome. The primary strategic role of the naval guns was continuous, devastating suppression of the German artillery and offensive movements. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers positioned offshore maintained a massive sustained barrage on German positions on the Alban Hills and the surrounding defensive ring. This immense, long-range firepower systematically pulverized German strongpoints, suppressed counter-battery fire, and inflicted heavy casualties on the German forces, preventing them from launching a sustained, coordinated push to annihilate the beachhead. The naval guns were the ultimate, non-negotiable defensive line. The effectiveness of the naval guns was amplified by the superiority of Allied fire control. Naval observers on the beachhead, working in coordination with sophisticated radar and communication systems, could rapidly direct massive, precise fire onto German concentrations and counterattacks. This ability to deliver immediate, overwhelming fire support transformed the static defense into an aggressive, retaliatory posture, guaranteeing that the German forces paid a catastrophic price for every attempt to breach the perimeter. The German forces, lacking any equivalent naval asset or air power to challenge the Allied control of the sea, were forced to endure the continuous, devastating naval fire. The German counterattacks were systematically broken by the relentless, overwhelming application of the Allied naval guns, confirming the total strategic superiority of the Allied system. The inability to neutralize the naval fire was a terminal strategic failure that ensured the German siege would be a costly, unsustainable war of attrition. The legacy of the firepower superiority at Anzio remains a profound testament to the decisive role of integrated naval power in amphibious operations. The naval guns transformed the isolated beachhead from a vulnerable target into a lethal, unassailable defensive fortress, ensuring that the immense human and logistical sacrifice ultimately led to the final strategic payoff. The relentless, devastating application of naval fire was the final strategic weapon that guaranteed the necessary endurance of the beachhead. The immense strategic gamble of the Anzio landing was underpinned by a critical political dimension: the unwavering support and political necessity advocated by the Allied leadership, primarily Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt. The decision to launch Operation Shingle was a high-stakes political choice, driven by the need to break the Italian stalemate and accelerate the advance toward Rome. Churchill was the primary strategic advocate for the Anzio operation, viewing the Italian campaign as the soft underbelly of Europe and advocating for the bold, high-risk maneuver to bypass the German defenses. His commitment to the operation, even after the initial failure to break out and the subsequent high cost of the siege, was unwavering. Churchill's political will, supported by Roosevelt's commitment to sustaining the immense logistical effort, ensured that the massive resources necessary to keep the beachhead alive were continuously deployed, despite the immense strategic drain. The political dimension was amplified by the symbolic value of Rome. The capture of the First Axis capital was viewed as a profound political necessity, a public declaration of the ultimate strategic outcome of the war. The immense political pressure to secure the final victory, despite the high cost and the immense logistical drain, ensured that the Allied command remained committed to the Anzio operation, transforming the siege from a military necessity into a political imperative. The unwavering political support provided the essential strategic continuity necessary to manage the protracted siege. The ability of the Allied command to commit massive reserves, sustain the immense logistical flow, and maintain the operational integrity of the beachhead was secured by the continuous, non-negotiable political backing of the Allied leadership. The immense strategic cost of the siege was deemed politically necessary to guarantee the final, inevitable triumph. The legacy of the political dimension at Anzio remains a powerful testament to the decisive role of political will in total war. The strategic gamble, driven by the political imperative to break the stalemate, was sustained by the unwavering commitment of the Allied leadership, ensuring that the immense human and logistical sacrifice ultimately led to the final, necessary strategic payoff. The political support was the final, unassailable strategic foundation that guaranteed the endurance of the beachhead. The ultimate, enduring strategic legacy of the Anzio beachhead was the ultimate price: the immense human and material sacrifice paid to buy strategic time, a currency that guaranteed the total collapse of the German defense in Italy. The immense strategic cost of the siege was the necessary payment for the ultimate strategic success of the Allied campaign. The ultimate price was rooted in the immense human sacrifice, the thousands of casualties sustained in the defense of the isolated beachhead, the immense suffering, the relentless German shelling, and the continuous high-intensity defensive war consumed massive numbers of American and British troops. This immense human cost, though tragic, was strategically necessary to fix the massive German forces that encircled the beachhead, diverting them from the main front and contributing to the eventual collapse of the Gustav Line. The ultimate price was also paid in strategic time and material commitment. The 4-month siege consumed immense logistical resources, shipping, air support, and materiel that were deemed necessary to sustain the pressure on the German command. The immense strategic drain was accepted as the necessary cost to maintain the cat's claw deep in the German rear, ensuring that the German forces could not sustain a cohesive defense of the main front. The strategic time bought by the immense endurance of the Anzio forces was the non-negotiable factor that guaranteed the success of Operation Diadem. The strategic consequence of the ultimate price was the total collapse of the German defense in Italy. The sustained pressure, the immense attrition, and the strategic strain imposed by the Anzio beachhead contributed decisively to the final collapse of the Gustav Line and the successful advance to Rome. The immense human and logistical sacrifice was the necessary precondition for the final strategic payoff. The legacy of Anzio remains a sobering testament to the immense strategic cost of total war. The survival of the beachhead, secured by the ultimate price of human sacrifice and logistical commitment, was the final necessary strategic act that guaranteed the total victory. The immense strategic cost confirmed the brutal strategic reality that some victories are bought only at the highest, most profound human price. The prolonged siege and immense logistical requirements of the Anzio beachhead created a significant strategic echo that reverberated across the Allied High Command, profoundly impacting the planning and execution of the massive Normandy invasion, Operation Overlord. The hard-won lessons and strategic constraints exposed at Anzio were immediately integrated into the planning for the decisive landing in France. The primary strategic echo was the non-negotiable need for immediate rapid breakout. The failure of the Anzio forces to quickly seize the Alban Hills and exploit the initial surprise served as a critical, negative template for the Normandy planners. The lesson was clear. Any hesitation after an amphibious landing, especially against a highly professional German defense, would lead to encirclement and a costly, prolonged siege. This fueled the aggressive planning for the rapid breakout from the Normandy beachheads, ensuring that the immense strategic risk of a tight perimeter would be minimized. The second echo was the criticality of overwhelming naval and air support. The survival of Anzio, secured by the continuous massive application of naval gunfire and air superiority, confirmed the immense value of integrated air-sea support for any major amphibious operation. The Normandy planning was adjusted to commit maximum air and naval resources to the initial landings and the subsequent expansion of the beachhead, guaranteeing the necessary fire support to suppress the German defense. The cost of Anzio became the investment in the success of Overlord. The strategic drain imposed by Anzio also served as a critical operational lesson. The immense consumption of landing craft, shipping, and logistical supplies in the Mediterranean theater highlighted the finite nature of Allied resources. The commitment of massive resources to keep the whale alive at Anzio forced the Overlord planners to meticulously manage their own resources, ensuring that the logistical base was secure and the operational demands were sustainable. The high cost of Anzio became the financial lesson for the final decisive assault on Europe. The legacy of the Anzio strategic echo remains a powerful testament to the immense value of battlefield experience. The high-cost siege provided the necessary, brutal lessons that guaranteed the success of the even more massive invasion of Europe. The strategic echo of Anzio ensured that the mistakes made on the coastal plain of Italy were not repeated on the beaches of Normandy. The German strategic response to the Anzio landing, dictated by Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, remains a powerful historical study in the relentless pressure and tactical brilliance of a professional, disciplined defense in a losing war. Kesselring's commitment to annihilating the beachhead, despite the immense strategic pressure on the Gustav Line, was a masterpiece of determined, coordinated counter-reaction. Kesselring's primary strategic goal was containment and systematic attrition. Recognizing the immediate existential threat posed by the landing, he committed massive forces to encircling the beachhead, sealing off the low-lying plain, and utilizing the commanding high ground of the Alban Hills for continuous artillery bombardment. His strategy was to consume the Allied forces in a costly, prolonged siege, denying them the capacity for a decisive breakout and minimizing the strategic advantage of the landing. The relentless, accurate shelling, Hell's Half-Acre, was the primary execution of this containment strategy. The German commitment to the counterattack, despite the immense logistical strain and the continuous Allied air support, confirmed the immense strategic value placed on the defense of Rome and the Gustav Line. Kesselring's decision to prioritize the annihilation of the beachhead over the reinforcement of the main front was a high-stakes gamble that almost succeeded in driving the Allies back into the sea. His systematic, coordinated deployment of armored and infantry reserves demonstrated the tactical excellence and the professional discipline of the German command. The strategic failure of Kesselring was not in his tactics, but in the total, unassailable industrial and material superiority of the Allies. While his forces succeeded in containing the beachhead and inflicting immense casualties, the American logistical system guaranteed that the massive material and manpower losses were continually replaced. Kesselring was fighting a technologically and industrially superior adversary that could sustain the immense attrition indefinitely. His tactical brilliance was ultimately overcome by the superior systemic resilience of the Allied war machine. The legacy of the German perspective remains a testament to the immense tactical skill and professional discipline of the German forces in Italy. Kesselring's relentless pressure transformed the Anzio landing from a potential triumph into a near catastrophe, demonstrating the immense cost required to defeat a professional, determined defense. The siege of Anzio was the ultimate strategic execution of the German commitment to total defense in a losing war. The survival and ultimate strategic success of the Anzio beachhead were secured by the absolute logistics of endurance, the continuous high-risk commitment of the Allied navies to sustain the isolated forces under relentless enemy fire. The Navy's role was non-negotiable, transforming the vulnerable sea lane into the resilient lifeline that guaranteed the necessary endurance of the beachhead. The primary naval challenge was the high-risk supply mission. The tight perimeter of the beachhead placed the entire unloading process and the supply ships within range of the German heavy artillery. The Navy responded with immense ingenuity and discipline, utilizing specialized landing craft, high-speed night unloading operations, and continuous anti-aircraft defense to ensure the safe delivery of ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. The continuous flow of shipping was the ultimate strategic refutation of the German siege. The naval commitment was also essential for fire support. The immense, sustained barrage from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers provided the final, non-negotiable layer of defense against the German counteroffensives. The naval guns systematically suppressed the German artillery, annihilated troop concentrations, and prevented any sustained breach of the perimeter, guaranteeing the survival of the beachhead. The integration of naval fire control with the ground forces was the ultimate expression of technological supremacy. The strategic consequence of the Navy's logistics of endurance was the total stability of the beachhead. The continuous flow of supplies and the constant fire support ensured that the immense human and logistical sacrifice was sustained, allowing the Anzio forces to remain rooted in the mud until the main Allied armies could break through. The total strategic payoff, the final advance to Rome, was fundamentally dependent on the unwavering, high-cost commitment of the Allied navies. The legacy of the Navy's role remains a powerful testament to the principle of logistical primacy in amphibious operations. The siege of Anzio confirmed that the success of a high-risk landing is inextricably linked to the capacity to sustain the forces indefinitely under fire. The total strategic victory was secured by the immense, high-cost commitment of the Allied navies to the continuous, unyielding logistical lifeline. The intense, high-cost siege of Anzio exposed profound moral ambiguity regarding the conduct of the conflict, particularly concerning the treatment of prisoners of war, and the immense psychological burden placed upon the combatants. The siege was fought to the limits of human endurance, testing the ethical boundaries of both the Allied and German forces. The moral ambiguity was rooted in the high-intensity siege warfare. The systematic attrition, the proximity of the forces, and the continuous shelling created an environment where ethical boundaries were often blurred. The German forces, operating under immense pressure and adhering to the harsh code of the collapsing regime, occasionally resorted to brutal, high-cost tactics. The Allied forces, enduring the relentless shelling and the continuous attrition, were forced to make difficult, split-second decisions under extreme stress. The treatment of prisoners of war was a critical moral factor. While the Allied forces maintained the adherence to the Geneva Conventions, the immense logistical and medical challenges of managing German prisoners in the tight, isolated perimeter were immense. The German command, conversely, faced immense logistical challenges in managing Allied captives, often leading to neglect or mistreatment. The moral ambiguity was amplified by the desperation of the conflict. demanding the constant commitment to ethical standards even in the face of strategic necessity. The immense psychological cost of the siege was a moral burden on both sides. The German forces, enduring the continuous naval fire and the strategic failure of the counteroffensive, were pushed to the limits of human endurance. The Allied forces, enduring the Hell's half-acre shelling and the constant threat of annihilation, suffered immense psychological trauma. The siege was a devastating moral test of the human capacity to maintain ethical conduct under extreme, sustained pressure. The legacy of the moral ambiguity remains a sobering reminder that total war is fought to the limits of human endurance. The immense strategic cost of the siege was compounded by the ethical burden placed upon the combatants, demanding a final, profound commitment to the laws of war, even in the face of strategic desperation. The siege of Anzio was a devastating moral crucible that tested the ultimate resilience of the human spirit. The ultimate enduring legacy of the Anzio beachhead remains the profound cost of the calculated risk, a total strategic victory secured by immense human and logistical sacrifice, which confirmed the absolute necessity of audacity in the face of strategic deadlock. The siege of Anzio was the ultimate demonstration that courage, when supported by an unyielding industrial and logistical system, could indeed outlast chaos. The core legacy is the confirmation of the necessity of strategic maneuver. The Anzio landing, despite its immense cost, broke the static, costly stalemate of the Gustav Line, forcing the German command to commit massive reserves and ultimately accelerating the final advance to Rome. The strategic gamble, though high cost, was ultimately necessary to achieve the final, non-negotiable strategic objective. The enduring strategic lesson is the primacy of sustained endurance. The survival of the beachhead for 4 agonizing months, secured by the continuous flow of supplies and the immense commitment of naval fire support, confirmed the strategic resilience of the Allied system. The German forces, unable to sustain the high-cost siege indefinitely, were ultimately defeated by the superior logistical and human endurance of the Allied forces. The legacy of Anzio remains a testament to the profound strategic and human cost of total war. The immense sacrifice of the Allied forces, the logistical ingenuity, and the unwavering political will confirmed the unassailable strategic superiority of the Allied system. The siege of Anzio was the ultimate crucible, forging a total strategic victory that was purchased at the highest, most profound human price. The final verdict remains clear. American forces stormed the beaches of Anzio, and the battle that followed proved, through immense sacrifice and logistical resilience, that courage could outlast chaos. The total strategic payoff was secured by the immense cost of the calculated risk.